Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of JRock's Pop Culture Revolution. This is our pop culture show, and we're the loudest voice on the internet when it comes to pop culture. I am your host, Jason JRock Houston, and our guest today is David Snowden. Now, David, you've been doing what you do for the last 40 years, and it's part of the pop culture world, I guess you could say. Would you say that, would you call yourself a PR man? How would you describe what you do?
Yeah, it's funny you asked that because that's the question I never know how to answer.
Okay.
And last weekend, I was talking to my father and I told him it was going to be 40 years on Monday. And then
Wow.
he said to me, he says, "Well, can you explain to me what you do?"
Mhm.
Because even after 40 years, he still doesn't know. And how I kind of related it to him was when I was growing up, there was nothing my father couldn't fix. And
Mhm.
I said, it was kind of like that. I said, when somebody called you and said, I had a plumbing problem, you didn't know how to do it. He went, he researched it, he figured it out, and then he went and he fixed the problem. And it's sort of kind of the same thing. I started by doing fan clubs. I started with a Kiss fan club and it just kind of progressed from there because as you get into things, you start to realize, well, a fan club, that was social marketing back in the 80s.
Yeah, yeah. I've been following you all these years, and what really impressed me is a lot of like going back 40 years that predates the internet. So a lot of what you did was before the internet even existed. I'm sure once the internet pops up, it's like, oh wait, that's a great tool we can use for what we do. But going back, I do remember seeing ads like in the back of, if you, I dare say, Circus Magazine.
Mhm.
And I think that's where I first heard your name. I used to collect Kiss bootlegs, and your name was. I remember seeing you like with one of the Kiss fan clubs do these interviews where I think you interviewed all the Kiss guys like Eric Carr, Vinnie Vincent, Mark St. John, and so that's where you first came on my radar.
Yeah, I would share some of the tapes with some of my friends, and one of them went out and started selling them.
Wow.
And that happens, and sometimes you never know who you're going to give something to. It's like when you lend somebody a CD, it never comes back.
But at the same time, that probably at that point, it made you realize, okay, there's value to what I'm doing, here. Um,
Yeah, well, I mean, where I saw the value was here I started doing a Kiss fanzine initially because, there was no more Kiss Army.
sure.
And I would go in the back of Circus magazine and look up different things, and I found out people were doing fanzines. I didn't find any in the United States. I found one in Canada, one in the Netherlands, Japan. And I thought it's a good time to start one of my own. So I started a Kiss fanzine called the Kiss Revolution. I did that for about 6 months, maybe, and this goes back to like 83.
Okay.
And I got a call from a guy in Massachusetts, Keith LaRue, and he said to me he was doing Kiss merchandise, wanted to know if we could put the two together and make a Kiss fan club, and that's where the Kiss Force was born.
Wow.
And as we're doing the Kiss Force, record companies would reach out and ask to buy the mailing list, and it was like, no, that's our Kiss mailing list. We're not going to sell that. And in doing the different interviews with, all the members of Kiss, and uh, one day when I was talking to Vinny, he kept saying, "Why don't you come do my fan club?" And that's when I thought, well, I can do an unofficial Kiss fan club, or I could do an official fan club for a band that was signed to a label and maybe make a career out of it. And it just stuck.
hmm Now, speaking of
Yeah.
Vinnie Vincent, I understand, doing my research on you, that he's one guy. I mean, you're one guy that he doesn't allow himself to get too close and too personal with too many people. But you got close with him for a while. What was that experience like?
Vinny was a really nice guy. And maybe this is sound bad, but it's like when the chips are down, he is right there in your corner. He's ready for you to do whatever it is that it takes. But then as success starts to happen, it seems like that's where some of that creeps in of, oh my God, what is he doing now? I mean, because here you had the first record was incredible. It was the fastest selling album in the history of Chrysalis Records as far as debut albums go. Then they had the second album, All Systems Go, and things looked really primed to happen. I mean, you don't have a band with Mark Slaughter on vocals, Dana Strum on bass, and Bobby Rock on drums and not be a huge thing. And then it just became one of those things where just all imploded because of, things that Vinny did. And it's
Yeah,
sad.
like you said, very talented band, and it's kind of interesting because if you look at like "Stick It to You," the debut Slaughter album, it's kind of like I get the feeling that's what Dana and Mark wanted to be the type of music they want to be doing, all along. And you got your own band, you can do what you want. Um, but I like if you ask me, my opinion, the two Vinnie Vincent albums, I love the first one the best.
Mhm.
I not nothing against Mark or anything, but I think like maybe Slaughter's his band. He has more freedom to do what he wants. Where maybe because it is Vinny's band, he was held back a little bit from doing what he wanted.
Well, and again, when your name is on the marquee and it was Vinnie Vincent
Yeah,
Invasion, and Vinnie had talked about eventually dropping the word the words Vinnie Vincent and just be Invasion, it just never materialized. And his first record, yeah, it was a great record, but that's with every band.
yeah,
You
yeah,
listen to their first record, you've got your whole life to write it. And then when your second one comes up a year, 2 years later, you got to struggle to get that new material out. I mean,
yeah.
and
And,
like you
and I
said,
don't
the
know if you
first
want to.
Slaughter record, I mean,
Yeah,
that first Slaughter record had a lot of hits on it.
sure, sure.
They had all that time to sit down and write that stuff together.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. And I don't know if you want to get into this. I'll respect if you don't. What do you think of the current Vinnie Vincent? As far as like wanting to charge fans $2 million for a record. I mean, again, I respect you don't want to talk about it, but
no, that's okay. I don't mind. Vinny is Vinny,
yeah,
and he is a talented songwriter, a talented guitar player. Um, he really should be out there releasing
yeah,
music. And to me, that's what it should be. It should be all about the music.
yeah.
And it's a shame that he wants to go out and charge people that kind of money. I mean, I think he's looking at music doesn't really sell anymore. It's all about live performances. People aren't coming out to see him live. How many autograph sessions can you keep doing to
Yeah.
sustain yourself? But I know I would never pay that kind of money for that, and especially with the way the contract was written, I'd go back in and rewrite that so many different ways that he would reject it from me. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree with you. I mean, and I'm not sitting here because I was a Vinnie Vincent fan back in the day, and if that new album was to come out, proper way, like a typical album, I'd go and buy it. I've heard, the Guitars from Hell album, it's on YouTube. You can get most of it, but and it's almost sounds like a carbon copy of the debut album with Robert Flashman. It featured Robert Flashman, so I would go out and buy it. But it's a shame, just like Gene Simmons when he came out with his Vault CD. It's a little too pricey for me. So, but if somebody wants to go on that, buy it. I totally respect that. But it's again, I think that's even totally a different type of thing. So let's get back to when you started the Kiss fan club. Do you remember who was the first one of them that you interviewed?
Eric Carr.
Okay.
And Eric was the interview that I requested. I figured he was still relatively the new guy, and everybody, Gina Paul were doing all the interviews in all the magazines, on the video stations, all that stuff. So I thought, well, let's hear from Eric. Let's get his perspective of things. And I always liked the guy. And when they gave me the interview, it was like, okay, great. So I did the interview with him. Um, After that, I did an interview with Ace when Ace was at the power station in New York City recording demos for the first Frehley's Comet.
Yeah.
Um, I actually interrupted session as he was doing a scratch vocal, as they called it, for Into the Night.
Oh wow.
And that was a lot of fun. And, you know, it was because of the guy that set that all up for me. It was because of him that I even got involved in music. And that was a guy who was Kiss's road manager for many years, George Suet.
Oh, of course, yes.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah, George, he was out there, with Kiss during the Dynasty tour and all the way up until Creatures of the Night. And when Ace did his Seven City tour, right after he left Kiss, it was before the Fearless Condom album came out. I think it was in 83, 84, might have been 85.
yeah, yeah.
It's hard to remember, so many years, but it
Sure.
was
Yeah,
probably 85. But anyway, uh, I do remember it was on March 3rd, and I went up to Scranton, Pennsylvania, and I saw the show. Person who set me up with the tickets is Ken Sharp, who people in the Kiss
sure.
community, they know Ken. He writes a lot of the Kiss books and things. He hooked me up with the tickets. I went to the show, and it was in a old movie theater,
Hmm.
and the backstage door was a curtain. So I walked through the curtain. I saw George Suet. I walked up to him. He looked at me and he goes, "Who the fuck are you? And what the fuck are you doing here?"
Yeah, wow, wow. Yeah.
And I said to him, I said, "George," I said, "I'm David Snowden. I've called your house and I've left several messages for you. You haven't returned my call." So I said, "Here I am."
Oh, wow.
And then he turned around and he looked at Anton Fig and he goes, "Anton, hold on to this guy. Don't let him go anywhere." He said, "I'll be right back."
Wow, wow.
And then I talked to all the guys in Ace's band then, which was Arthur Stead, Richie Scarlett, Anton Fig, and John Regan. And about 10 minutes later, George came out and he said to me, "He's come with me." He said, "Of course, we can't do any pictures because at this point, Ace
Yeah.
hadn't come out officially without the makeup." He took me into the backstage area there. It was just Ace sitting in the corner. And he said to Ace, "David's here. He wants an autograph today. We're going to do an interview with him and we'll see where it goes."
Wow.
So, it worked out really good for me, and George
Now,
kind
as
of
a
took me
Kiss
on.
fan, David, what was that like seeing Ace Frehley for the very first time post Kiss, but also because, like you said, they were very strict. They didn't ever let Kiss be seen without makeup. So seeing him for the very first time out of costume, what was that like for you as a fan?
Uh, I didn't really take it as a whole lot different
Okay.
because,
Yeah.
you know, I loved all iterations of
Sure, sure.
Kiss.
Yeah.
And it was funny, and it goes back to how naive you are when you're younger. You think, "Oh, somebody left the band, but they're still good friends."
Yeah.
No, not
Not really.
necessarily. And that was part of doing the Kiss Force. I was doing interviews with Ace. I did one with Peter Criss in 85 when he started his Balls of Fire and he was trying to come back out with stuff. And, you know, Mark St. John, after he was out of the band, of course, Vinnie, all the different ones. And I never took it as a conflict of interest or
Sure.
anything, because I thought it's all one big happy family.
Yeah, yeah.
Then you realize the reality of it. But I think, especially as a fan of a band,
Uh,
when you're so into a band and somebody leaves, you don't end up with just a record from your band. You end up with also one from the other artist.
sure, sure, sure.
So, I mean, in those years, you got a Kiss record, you got a Vinnie Vincent record, you got an Ace Frehley record. I mean, it was kind of cool to get all that different things out. So,
Yeah, yeah, and we were still hoping for a Peter Criss one, but and, his solo career at that time had kind of stalled. But I was wondering, over years of doing this, did you ever had any encounters with Peter Criss? Chance to interview him?
oh yeah, I interviewed Peter in 1985 when he was joining a band called Balls of Fire.
Oh yes, yeah, I remember.
And initially, the band was called Jane because the lead singer, her name was Jane. And then before the Kiss reunion tour, George Stewart was managing both Ace Frehley and Peter Criss.
Okay,
And in managing both of those, when the Kiss reunion tour happened, they were allowed to keep their fan clubs, but they couldn't do anything else.
yeah. Oh wow.
So George came to me and he said, "Look," he says, "Peter had this fan club with Tony Nicole Tony Records, or TNT is what they, you know." Um, but he said they started a fan club, it screwed up. Peter owes people. Not that he owes them, it's a different company, but people still look to the band or the band member and they go, "This was your problem."
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
the same thing happened with Ace Frehley with his Rock Soldiers.
Wow.
So during the transition into the Kiss reunion tour, I took over both of those and I was trying to straighten it out. And I was selling the merchandise that they still had left over from, their previous fan club stuff. And I got things all straightened out. So a lot of times, like during the reunion tour, I'd go backstage and I would give Ace and Peter the money that they were owed at that time,
Oh, wow.
along with an accounting, statement of everything so that they knew nobody was ripping them off. So,
Wow, that's good. I was because I kind of I joined that Peter Chris fan club, never got anything, but like you said, it was around the time that they went back to Kiss, so that makes now sense. Now, while we got you here, David, because as you can tell, I'm a huge Kiss fan myself. I was curious, what's your take on Mark St. John? Because again, I at the time we believed kind of what we're told to believe, which was that he had this rare arthritic condition. But since then, more, especially since his death, more has come up out about Mark St. John that maybe had more of a drug addiction and they really didn't want to put that out there. What's your opinion on that?
I got to know Mark pretty well. And to this day, I'm actually still friends with his manager.
Oh,
And we talk every now and again. Things are good. And I shared with him at one point that of all the members of Kiss, Mark St. John was probably my least favorite.
okay.
And again, it was just, you don't always gel with everybody.
Yeah, of course.
You and I, we might sit down, have a nice little talk, and get together and work and do a few projects together, and then go, you know what? I like hanging out with you, but I don't like working with you, type of thing. But in any case, with Mark, I was there and I saw the 2.5 shows that he played. I was
Yeah.
there in Baltimore when he came out. I took a bunch of pictures of that, which bunch of them they used for that A&E History special.
Okay.
Uh, anyway, Mark's playing didn't quite fit with Kiss the
Yeah. Yeah.
way it should have. And to me, that's what it was. The drug thing happened later on, you
Okay.
know, and that happens to a lot of artists, happens to a lot of regular people in life.
Sure.
I mean, you're on top of the world and then you lose your job. Maybe you fall into the bottle, maybe you fall into something else. And
Reason I asked is because again, Gene and Paul were kind of their own PR people, and they would put out what they wanted to put out, whatever the message was. And even Paul Stanley kind of touched upon this in his book, where he says, "Okay, Mark told us he had this arthritic condition that he couldn't play with the band, but then he goes off and he does this band White Tiger, and he's still playing the guitar. So and it kind of just disappears. So." I was just kind of curious if maybe they were just saying, "Oh, okay, he had this hand disease, and maybe he really didn't have."
he did actually have the writer's syndrome,
Okay,
and it did get cured up.
yeah,
And it was good by the time they started the US tour. But by then, Bruce had been on tour with them, knew the stuff. Bruce would rehearse sometimes with Mark to get him up to snuff. They brought him out. He did the Baltimore show. And, it didn't feel as good as Bruce being
yeah,
in Kiss. And when Mark left, he went back home. He wanted to join a super group that did include Rudy Zarzo and a couple other guys. And when they called Kiss's management and they asked about Mark, they kept saying, "Oh, he's got this,
Dis-
writer syndrome. He can't play." And Mark actually sent me, and we put it in one of the issues of the Kiss Force, a note from his doctor that said it was gone and that
okay,
he was fully capable of playing. And then he formed, White Tiger, you know, which wasn't a bad first record,
yeah,
and so
yeah. It's kind of sad that, and then the way his life ended just so tragically. But he was in Kiss for a brief moment, but that's why we'll always remember him, if you know what I mean.
yeah. Oh, and I absolutely agree. And I think that the way that he died, the way things went for him in life, it's very tragic. And like I said, it happens to a lot of people. But when it
unfortunately.
happens to an artist that you follow, you're just
Yeah.
like, wow, you know.
And now you
So
mentioned, of course, Bruce Kulick. I was curious, did you ever get a chance to interview his late great brother Bob?
uh, I've met Bob on several occasions, but I never sat down and interviewed him. When I stretched out and started going to, like when I did the Frehley's Rock Soldiers fan club,
Uh,
I did do an interview with Eddie Kramer where we sat down, we talked about Ace's 78 solo album, but I never really stretched too much further with other people.
okay, okay. And
Yeah,
now, of course, we talked a little bit about Eric Carr. I'm sure, like, in 1991, when you heard the news that Eric had passed, like all of us Kiss fans, it had, especially having interviewed him and met him, that had to really hit you pretty hard.
yeah, I mean, it was very, very sad. And I really liked Eric. I was going to go up and see him in a hospital, but I felt like that was the time for his
Of
family,
course. Yeah,
not just for fans running in and
sure,
out.
sure. Yeah.
And his funeral, we were told that we could go, but I thought to me that's kind of imposing on the family.
Oh, sure.
And
Yeah.
it yeah, it's one thing when somebody dies really young and a lot of people show up, but it's another thing when you're a rock star and
Yeah.
people show up because then it turns into a shit show.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you've
And
heard the same stories. I mean, just talking about his funeral, I mean, everybody showed up. I mean, I think probably Eric would have been surprised that he was so loved by the fans.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it really affected people. And, to this day, I mean, and I think that's why, to me, when I watched the video for God Gave Rock and Roll to You, it means that much more knowing that he was in the conditioning, but how badly he wanted to be there. And that's the final thing he did.
yeah, and his sister is still working on another documentary about Eric, um, where it's going to basically cover just very quickly before Kiss, but mostly his Kiss years.
Yeah, yeah.
And uh, I was helping her out with it for a while. I saw a couple rough edits of it. Um, I was able to get George Sewitt to do his first interview ever
Wow.
for the video. We went up to his house up in New York. We sat down, set it up with the camera crew, kind of directed through it. Somebody else asked the questions, then I would jump in and intervene with, George, let's, get back to some more of the Kiss stories. It's great to, um, or I should say, let's get back more to the Eric Carr stuff. It's
Yeah,
great talking about what Gina Paul did, but it is an Eric Carr documentary.
yeah, yeah.
And they were there. So, and then George was like, oh, yeah. He's like, yeah, you forget. And it's like, yeah, you do. Because he remembers some of the great things, like when they were in Italy and there was a bomb threat and all of them are running. And he said one of the funniest things he ever saw was Gene at the time, it was those big like the baked potato boots.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, the Dynasty
yeah,
unmasked costume, and they were really hard for Gene to walk in. And George said, Gene was the first one that got to the room, you know, where they told him all to wait. And, he said the boots were laying in the hall someplace, and he was talking
wow.
about how funny that was. And it's like, well, that's a great story, but how did Eric react to it? And he goes, oh, he says, Eric just walked down to the room like it was nothing.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah, it's like stuff like that, you know,
That's that.
hopefully,
Yeah. Another great story Paul tells in his book is like on the Unmasked tour when Eric first joins the band, some photographer, comes to his hotel room, and him being as naive as he was, she gets him like out of his clothes and taking pictures, and he's like, "I can't believe you let her take your pictures, without any clothes, and you're out of makeup and all this." And like, but they got the pictures back, whatever they had to do. But it's like he was so naive. Yeah.
and you know what? You can't fault somebody for that
No.
because when you're thrown in that situation, by that point, Kiss had 7 years of experience of what to do, what not to do, and they certainly made their mistakes early on. Like Cream Magazine, when they came out and said, "Oh yeah, we talked to your manager. He said you can take some pictures without makeup," and they did that little pseudo photo session. But so Eric made his mistakes. I mean, we all do.
Yeah,
You
and I
go,
will say, Gene and Paul must have really loved the guy too, deep down, because Joey Casada, who's now the drummer in Twisted Sister, he put out a book about the three Kiss drummers, and
yeah.
I've heard for years the story about that Gene and Paul bought Eric this Porsche, and he finally got a chance to see a picture of the Porsche in Joey's book, but they didn't buy every member of Kiss a Porsche, so they must have really loved Eric when they met him.
Well, and again, that goes back to one of the George Stewart stories where when he joined Kiss, they were trying to figure out something to give Eric as a like welcome in, to the rock world.
Yeah.
And George had suggested a Porsche because Paul Stanley had one.
Okay.
And so they bought him the Porsche. And, one of the things that Paul talks about in his book, and George said the same thing, is Eric always liked camouflage.
Okay.
And Eric wanted to paint the Porsche camouflage.
Wow.
And, and George said, yeah, I had this pull him aside, go, dude, no, that's not what,
Yeah.
So, and again, when you're young, you're getting into something, that's what you do. You
Yeah.
think it's
Yeah.
so good. And
Great stories. We still looking back on our lost rock hero here, Eric Carr. So fondly. And of course, Ace passing the way he did last year. The first of the original four to pass. Again, when that news hit, I'm sure it was shocking, and it had to affect you.
yeah, it's always hard. I mean, I've had, being in the business for 40 years and, you know, I think almost all the artists I've worked with were always older than I was.
Yeah.
Not anymore, but, from back in the 80s and 90s. And, when any of them die, I mean, it's sad because you remember all the good times that you
Yeah.
spent with them and the fun stuff. I mean, I remember going to the Hard Rock Cafe in New York City. This was the original Hard Rock Cafe that had the tail end of the, I think, Cadillac sticking out of it or something. It was
Okay. Yeah.
yeah. And as I was going there, when Ace was going to donate the smoking guitar, a guy came out and held the door, and we stopped. And we're like, "Hey, Billy Joel." That's who it was. He was standing there holding the door for us. It was like, oh, can we get some autographs? And he actually signed the back of a 11 by 17 size print that I had of Ace from the Dynasty tour. I wanted
Oh
Ace.
wow.
So for the longest time, I had this picture in a frame. You could see the Ace Frehley signature on the front, and it had Billy Joel's on the back, so you had to take it out of the frame to see it. But
Oh, no, not everybody has one of those. I guarantee you. So
yeah. And then, we go into the Hard Rock and Ace is getting ready to donate the guitar and he decided to set it up and
yeah.
it didn't work. So Ace, being Ace, he leans over to the mic, he goes, it doesn't fucking work, and then started laughing his ass off.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
That's what Ace will always be remembered for, was his hysterical laugh. I mean, I don't know if you ever saw the classic version of that on the Tom Snyder show back in
oh
'70.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. I still remember staying up,
Yeah.
watching that. I got introduced to Kiss on the Paul Lynde Halloween special in
Okay. There you go.
'76.
Yeah. Yeah.
And after that, anytime that they said Kiss was going to be on, I wanted to watch it.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you got disappointed by the time you got to like in the 79, 80 era when they would say, okay, Kiss is going to be on the Jerry Lewis telethon.
Yeah.
And all they showed was the I Was Made for Loving You video. And it's like, it was kind of disappointing.
You
I
remember
wanted them
Kiss
to come
on
out
Solid
something.
Gold?
Yes, The World Without Heroes, and then
Yeah.
they did the lip singing "I." So
Yeah, there you go.
what
Yeah.
was it? Pancake batter on the face for
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah. So, David, we talked a lot about how you got your start today. I think I'd love to have you back because I imagine you have more great stories to tell. But before you wrap it up today, kind of bring us up to date with what you're doing these days.
do a little bit of everything. When somebody calls and they ask for something, if it's a job that I want to do and it's a band that I like, a friend of mine set me up. called me and said, "Hey, Foghat would like to have their manager wants to have some awards made because they were at 25 million on the track Slow Ride on Apple Music, which is really a very big accomplishment."
Sure, sure. Yeah.
And so I put together some mock-ups of what it was going to look like. And if you actually go out and you search Foghat for slow ride plaque presentation or something,
Okay.
you see it where the guys actually that they were presented to the band on stage because I sent it to their manager's house. The manager got it, and so I mean that was kind of nice. And there's a lot of stuff I work with. A friend of mine, he just got a radio show here in Baltimore. He's going to be doing that. I've been working with him on some of the visuals that he's going to put out on the internet to introduce himself. We'll work on his bio a little bit. Uh, I still work with Silvertung quite a bit. They're a hard rock band here in the Mid-Atlantic area. And,
Yeah,
when I was
I interviewed them a few times. A great, great band. I just, I don't know why they're not bigger. You know what I mean? They're. It's just a matter. More people need to know about them.
Well, and again, in today's world, it's so hard with music because, people seem to think, and I get a lot of these calls where somebody will call and say, "Hey, I got a song. It's so much better than this other band." And it's like, okay, well, how much money do you want to put into it? And then they go, "Oh, so it's all about the money." And then I have to explain to them, a band is a business.
Sure, sure.
Anything you do, it's a business. Now, if you're doing it as a hobby and you don't care if you're playing in a garage and play a club every now and again, and your buddies all come out and drink with you and you have a good time while you play a live set, that's fine. But if you're serious about what you do, you need to invest into that.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And a guy like you, David, you are serious. I mean, you're in the business 40 years, and like I said, you got your start in the business before there was even an internet, and the internet became a tool I'm sure you used along the way, but you did it all just from your love of music, and look what you've created for you. So if you can do that, then these bands can do that if they're really eager to get their music out there.
Yeah, and what's pretty ironic is I've done a lot of great things, and a lot of bands have given me gold records, platinum records. I've gotten a few Maryland Music Awards from some of the bands I've worked with. And, those are really special because ultimately the bands pay for that.
Yeah,
So for them to give you one of those, it's coming out of their pocket.
sure, sure.
And that's really nice. And you look at that and you think, wow, that's kind of cool. And I did a bunch of things for a bunch of TV shows, and that would have to be a whole nother thing. But
Yeah,
um, and that was cool to walk into stores and see that, and designing a lot of different merchandise for bands and going to concerts and seeing, 4 or 5 thousand people wearing the t-shirts that you designed, and
wow.
going into Spencer
I mean,
Gifts
that
and
just
seeing your
just
hot
design a
top.
T-shirt. That's probably got to be one aspect of this that you never really initially saw yourself getting into. It just kind of happened along the way because of all this other stuff you were doing.
Yeah, and I guess, ironically, with all the things I've done over the years, which until, I start talking to somebody, I don't think about it every day
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it's a job. You get up, you do it, you don't think about it. And, the biggest thing that I've ever done is not even music related.
Wow.
And I never, very few people know about it.
Okay.
But let's just say that I have something that is in over 70 million wallets across America,
Wow. Okay.
and that's quite an accomplishment
Yeah,
when you
there you
think
go.
about it. And it's not even one of my proudest moments of something that I did, but the fact that it had that impact. So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
can go on and say, I spent 40 years in the music business, and if you sit down and you start tallying it all up, I may have helped maybe get 30 million of those sales somehow, some way.
Wow.
But then I do something that I thought was just okay, and it ends up in so many different people, that you're just like, wow, that's really something. But
Yeah, something to aspire for. So, like I said, David, I'd love to have you back on the show. Great talking to you today. I'm finally getting to meet the man. Like I said, I followed you the last 40 years, a lot of stuff you've been doing, and and that's why I reached out to you. And great interview today. It's be going up on Monday. I'll send the link once it's up. So thanks for coming on the show. We really do appreciate having you on.
Oh yeah, anytime, man. Yeah. Did you stop your recording?
Yeah. Let me
Oh,
just give you.
okay.